Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the Cabinet meeting on 7th of February 2022. Thank you everyone for coming. First of all, just to go through the apologies for absence. So just to say that in the room we have Councillors Pritchard, Akigina and Welton, and also Councillor Peter Southgate, the Chair of Overview and Scrutiny. All other members of the Cabinet are attending the meeting online, and we also have attending online Councillors McLean and Holden from the Conservative Group. Item 2 is declarations of pecuniary interest, and nobody's indicated any. And so then the item 3 is minutes of the previous meeting. Can they all be agreed, or is there any disagreement? There's no disagreement, so that's agreed. So what I'm proposing to do is to take items 4, the reference from Overview and Scrutiny Commission, 5, the business plan, and 7, the financial monitoring report, all in one chunk. And we'll start at the outset with the reference back from Overview and Scrutiny Commission, and reporting on that we have the Chair of the Commission, and that's Councillor Peter Southgate. You have 3 minutes.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you for the opportunity to feedback on the meeting of the Commission. Firstly, we did endorse the recommendation of the Sustainable Communities Panel to hold the proposed savings on Dean City Farm, some £43,000. That would become operational only in 23-24, so we felt with a year out there may well be opportunities to find alternative savings for that one. We looked at the savings proposals in detail. It is worth saying too that the Healthy Communities and Children and Young People's panel did go through their proposed savings in detail. The fact they chose not to make a reference back is not evidence of a lack of involvement. They did delve into those savings in subject them to proper scrutiny. We did, in looking at the budget, acknowledge the difficulties that there continue to be in dealing with the legacy costs of the pandemic, and the fact that some of those costs remain unfunded and unresolved. Of the points we wanted to make in particular, one, and it's not new this year, but it is the difficulty of so phasing scrutiny as to coincide with the rounds the points at which the budget comes to Cabinet. And that was sort of thrown into relief when we were in fact looking on the 19th of January to an iteration of the budget that had already been superseded 2 days earlier on the version that came to Cabinet. I mean, this probably could be resolved by a little closer attention to timetabling of those meetings. We noted that there has been in recent years very heavy reliance placed on balancing the budget reserve. That will be to the tune of 11.5 million this year, and looking ahead, I see it will be another 8.5 million for 23-24. And we did note that the use of reserves in the text to the budget report says that this really can only be regarded as a one-off form of funding. And I know there are times when our director seems to have indeed conjured up a magic money tree in the way this use of reserves seems to be, we manage to make it ongoing from year to year, but it is in the end an illusion. And I think Cabinet has to think carefully about whether this is sustainable in the long term. I see I'm out of time, Chair, so.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Southgate. I want to reassure you that we watch the proceedings online as well. So were aware of of what took place at those meetings. To respond and then to lead on the business plan and the financial monitoring report, we have the Cabinet Member for Finance and Deputy Leader, Councillor Owen Pritchard.
Thanks a lot for that, Councillor Southgate. I enjoyed listening to, actually, when I came to ONS for the substance of the debate. I think Councillor Irons is going to speak to the DCF issue shortly after I've run through this, so I'll leave that for there. With regards to your two other points, yeah, I can see your frustration at the synchronization issue, and I think more should be done there to give substance to the debate. The balancing of the budget, I've always seen as a method of inter-year smoothing. Of course, money can only be spent once, and I don't think anyone's suggesting otherwise. I will let Caroline speak to that in more depth, but I don't really see what the criticism is, if that makes sense. I can't get to the nub of what you're saying at the moment, but perhaps Caroline has an insight there. With regards to the business plan, I'll speak to both the business plan and then the in-year spend, so the financial report. The recommendations are clear on page 1 of the business plan. It's quite a lengthy document, obviously, so but the executive summary is there for all to see. I'm not going to even cover all of the recommendations or in the indeed the executive summary, but I will remind people that this is effectively the medium-term financial strategy for the council, so the budget for the next 4 years. Of note is that we are increasing council tax, equating to a band D of £1,380.87, which is an increase of below 3%. I'll also raise, as I did in previous meetings, the fact that the Cabinet notes that the GLA precept is still not agreed by the London Assembly, and therefore this is a provisional figure, and that what we're doing is agreeing the capital investment, also agreeing the capital investment programme, the capital strategy, and the treasury management strategy. Needless to say, this remains a balanced budget through the use of inter-year smoothing as much as anything else, to ensure that we don't do unnecessary cuts in certain years when they could be smoothed out in other years. Of note, since it was last looked at in January, the 2022-23 report is in a better picture, but latter years less so. Unfortunately, the DSG notification from DFE still hasn't come in with regards to the safety valve, so we're operating on a number of assumptions, both over the 4 years and in year over that period. We're also there's an impact of the Wimbledon Common Conservators, which I will invite Caroline to speak to later. With regards to the in-year, so Cabinet Agenda Item 7, I think the most important figure is that there's a net adverse variance at year end on net service expenditure of just over 5 million, increasing to just over 7 million on corporate and funding items. Therefore, a small decrease compared to last month. I'll still remind everyone once again that the safety valve and the DSG funding has an impact in year as well as multi-year. But that's the essence of the reports. I'm mindful that the sort of most contentious issue of all of this, your concern about the accounting methodology aside, remains the DCF. So at this point, if it's okay, Chair, I'll invite Councillor Irons to cover that, or do you want to take the recommendations before then?
No, I think just before we bring in the director, it might make sense to ask Councillor Irons to talk about the proposed solution for this. Councillor Irons.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Pritchard. Just to, again, also thank Scrutiny for their work. It was interesting to see the discussion, and I understand with the sensitivities around this, so it was really good to see everybody taking it very seriously and trying their best to find alternatives. we have an alternative proposal though that we've come up with in partnership with Dean City Farm. We met with the trustees and we came to a long discussion and came to a solution that they feel works for them and it could really help with the budget pressures we have in the council. So I just want to thank Dean City Farm for their time and for their contribution to this process, because it was invaluable and something that I think we should continue to have that dialogue as we go forward. So the proposal is to delay the saving till 23-24, but then to taper it off throughout the next 5 years, so that would be a drop by 10% every year for the next 5 years. Alongside that would be capital investment in projects that allow Dean City Farm to generate its own income. And in addition to that, the Green Spaces team will be working with Dean City Farm to ensure that 10% dip every year is covered through other grant funding and other sources of income. That's the nuts and bolts of the proposal, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Irons. I think it's probably a good idea to bring in the director at this point, Caroline Holland. If you have any further elaboration on the business plan, the financial monitoring report, or further information that you think the Cabinet needs to take into account. Caroline.
Thank you, Chair. I suppose the first thing to say is just hot off the press that the government has published the final settlement. And so we've just had some notifications through from the LGA about some changes. They've also published the public health allocations, so it does look as if there's an additional 300,000 for us as a result of that. Clearly a significant amount of information in front of you tonight as part of the business plan preparation. And certainly to pick up on one of the issues that Councillor Southgate raised, we did amend the timetable of council meetings, which was agreed at last week's council, to take into account the specific issue that he raised about considering papers where there'd already been a further update to what had been proposed. So certainly with the information that you've got in front of you had changed again since February. So we have added in some additional funding to cover inflation increases because of the current rate of the RPI, currently over sort of 7%. So that is a significant risk for us that we think at this stage. We had further information came through on the taxi card concessionary fares, which has impacted in future years in particular. Clearly the GLA has had and TfL have had further funding, I think again to the end of the month. So that will have an impact on them, and also the actual number of users of passenger transport will have an impact on future charges going forward. Clearly, we did get some additional funding through when we've worked through the business rates to work through the share that we would be able to achieve after taking into account the appeals and bad debts provision that we still have to make. And that information is set out in the papers in front of you tonight as well. And we did have an increase in the deficit on the collection fund as well, which is a significant issue. Last year, the government did allow us to phase that over 3 years, but we have not been allowed to do so at this stage. So there has been an improvement in 23-24, but a deterioration, as Councillor Pritchard mentioned, in 24-25 and 25-26. With regards to the balancing the budget reserve, whilst it is a reserve and one-off, clearly the fact that we build in future years the use of it and therefore the increase in gap, we are mindful that further increases and savings or different proposals need to be made in those future years. We have actually topped up the balance in the budget reserve during this year's process because of the challenges being faced by the borough and staff in responding to COVID. So we did write back 3.6 million of savings that were unachievable, which is the first time that we've done that, but that was to give staff time to focus on what still needs to be done, to gather their energies to still dealing with the pandemic, but also to look at how we change the services and also dealing with the short and medium term aspirations and objectives of Merton 2030. With regards to the level of council tax increase, we are still awaiting confirmation of the LPFA levy, but the Wimbledon Putney and Commons Conservatives have announced that their 3.7% increase in the precept. Now that feeds into our average council tax increase calculation, and therefore this year, as did happen, I think quite a few years ago, that means we cannot actually, the council cannot increase its share of the council tax by 2%, because otherwise it would trigger a referendum. Now this year it is only an impact of about £4,000, but if the Commons Conservatives want to increase their rate, as they can do by RPI, then that could have a further impact and consequence on us. So we are keeping a close eye on that. At this moment in time, we are only allowed the precept for the future year 22-23. There has been no further announcement about what we may be able to do in those future years. And we had been promised, and I know everyone was anticipating, the outcome of the safety valve discussions and negotiations with the DfE. We had been promised the outcome in the middle of January, and indeed we did get an email which excited us all, but all it said was, you're going to find out a bit more at the end of the month. There still appears to be some discussions going on about the size of the contribution that Merton is expected to make to offset the overall deficit, and therefore we are awaiting those outcomes. But at this moment in time, I have not changed any of the assumptions for the current level of funding for the DSG. We did build in the January Cabinet Papers the additional staff that we believe will be required to work through with Jane and her colleagues in Children's Schools and Families, the works that will be needed to make those changes, regardless of whether we get funding through from the DfE or not. So that work can start, and the additional temporary capacity is already in place, and some of those staff already working through on some of those short-term changes until those permanent staff are able to be put in place. It is disappointing that we don't have that information at this stage, but we will be bringing back any outcome to future Cabinet and scrutiny to be able to look at the impact of that. That is likely now to be in the new financial year, just with the timings, and also clearly the pre-election period starting in mid-March. With regards to the monitoring report, as we have said, we do have still an anticipated adverse variance at the end of the financial year. Only a marginal movement this time, sort of 200k, and only a marginal movement in the DSG increase as well. So in some ways, good news. The debt outstanding to the authority has decreased from what we reported to you in September. So again, some relatively good news there about how we are managing those finances, and also some additions to the capital programme, which have now also then been built into the capital programme and impacts into the Treasury and Management Statement. So you can see what the consequences of those are as well. So our debt almost coming down by nearly £5 million, which is really good news. The month 9 Cabinet monitoring statement will also be going on to the Financial Monitoring Task Group in a couple of weeks' time as well, for them to scrutinise the monitoring report as well. I think that's probably it for me, but happy to take any questions. I suppose just to flag, because there has been some minor changes within the settlement, there will be some changes to the papers that will come forward to you in Council, and certainly we'll build in the impact of the change that Councillor Irons outlined, which will have the impact of increasing the deficit in those further future 3 years, but only marginally at this stage, and certainly not significant in light of the overall balances and shortfall that we still have in those future years. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline, the Director of Corporate Services. To appreciate your rigour around this, and sense, well, you can sense our frustration that there's still a degree of uncertainty, even just a few weeks away from having to make our budget decision, which is not ideal. But we're obviously making our case with the government to get more information at the earlier stage, and appreciate your view that the proposals that we're recommending around Dean City Farm are not significant financial ones, and can be achieved within the council's budget. There were a couple of questions flagged to me in advance from Councillor Stringer. Councillor Stringer, do you want to come in at this point?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, shall I ask them both at once? Is that easiest? Because one of them's about my area, and one of them isn't. So I'll start with the kind of easier one about my area. Obviously, I care a lot about dedicated schools grant, and the colleagues in the finance teams and CSF teams have been working so hard to put together a plan that we think is achievable. So what's the kind of ongoing impact of that uncertainty, and what's the kind of potential size of the change that could bring to the financial situation? That's my first question. My second question is about something outside my area of expertise, around the Wimbledon and Putney Common Conservators. So just to make sure I understand this, so we're only allowed to raise the total council tax by a certain amount, but they're allowed to choose how much theirs increases by. I think you said based on inflation, and therefore that decreases the amount that we can increase the kind of base council tax by. Is that right? And if so, what's the kind of overall financial implication for us on that? How much kind of money are we losing by theirs going up and therefore taking away from us?
I'll start with that one first, if I may. So the Wimbledon Putney Commons Conservators can increase their levy by the rate of inflation, RPI, at I think it's September. Clearly the issue has arisen this year because we've got the council tax referendum limit of 2%, but inflation is currently running significantly higher than that. Previous years it has been lower, so we haven't had that impact that we've had this year. They have not increased their levy by the maximum they could do, so that this year is a bonus to us, and it feeds into the average council tax calculation because it is a precept, so there is legislation governing that. The impact this year is that we lose out by £4,000. So it will look strange on the bills because we will still be putting ours up when you look at the roundings, and David is also on this call, so he can confirm he's looking at the council tax bills as well. It will still show 1.99, but it's sort of marginal, the actual the rounding. So again, whilst insignificant, it does have that impact. And so we'll be working through what that means. We're also sort of working closely with colleagues in Wandsworth and Kingston, who are also the neighbouring boroughs who are impacted by the precept as well, to make sure that we are aware of the impact that this has now on us going forward, if there are limits by which the amount we can raise our council tax without triggering a referendum. Clearly, normally the cost of a referendum we've estimated to be over £300,000, so it's not worth doing a referendum for £4,000. However, going forward, that may change, so we will be keeping a close eye on that. With regards to the DSG and the conversations we've been having, the numbers that are currently in the budget, and I have not changed the assumptions based out in previous years, as I've explained in what I call my Section 25 statement. So that said, we would fund 100% of the deficit at the end of 21-22, and then 50% going forward. So you will see on page 549, there is a line set out there in the first box, provision for DSD deficit. So we were setting monies aside to offset the deficit because we are not legally allowed to put monies into the DSG. When we were having conversations with the DFE, it was clear they wanted us to make a significant contribution. So whilst the size of the deficit had come down, it's because of the significant work that Jane and her department and team were putting into it, as well as additional monies that we were ourselves putting in. We're waiting to see if that's been agreed, but also the consequences wider on other local authorities if it is seen that the local authorities are bailing out the DFE because there is insufficient funding from them to fund our high needs costs of our SEN places. So we don't know quite how close that will be, but it will also potentially impact on the capital discussions that we're looking to access as well, to be able to expand our secondary and primary schools, and also potentially the new special needs school as well. So there's quite a lot still all caught up with it. And I keep getting urgent emails, can you provide us with a piece of information or an urgent meeting? So we are being very clear that we want to progress this, but not at any cost. So if the impact is too great on us, then we will see what does need to be done. But also I've been making it clear that there is limited opportunity for scrutiny and for Cabinet and Council to take the decisions that may need to be taken as a consequence of this. So that's why at this stage, the numbers have stayed the same. So it is likely if we were to get an outcome, there'll be an impact, but I can't say because I don't know over what timing and what level of contribution they may require from us. So all I know is if we're successful, the numbers will change, but they could change in different years. So that's the only assurance I can give you at this stage, unfortunately. But we are pushing hard with colleagues, both at DFE and now at DULUC, to see if we can get this over the line.
Thank you, Caroline, and can I offer my praise and thanks to you and your team, and to Jane McSherry, the Director of Children's Schools and Families, and her team, and the Cabinet members, Owen, before him, Tobin as well, and Ellie, for the work that you've been doing to progress this safety valve work with the government. It's been a source of great frustration to us for many years that we don't think we've had our special needs education funded properly by the government, but it does seem like we're getting there, albeit frustratingly late in the budgeting process. And also thank you for your explanation about the conservators. It does seem an anomaly with council funding that the government would tell us what our core spending power needs to be. However, if a third party, the Conservatives, want to increase their charges, there's nothing that we can do to stop that, and they can potentially reduce our spending power on our council services as a result of that. And whilst it's not very significant amount this year, there is a possibility that it could be significant in future years, and that could have a significant effect on council taxpayers in Merton, and an impact on our core spending power. I just wondered, in terms of dealing with that, presumably that is a parliamentary matter, is it, or would it be a change of the law that would need that, or would it even be private legislation required to change something like that? Actually, I'm probably looking at the Chief Legal Officer, Louise, round here, but if either of you know, that'd be interesting.
Well, if I can start, and perhaps Louise can sort of come in at the end. Certainly the conversations that we've been having initially, certainly with Wandsworth, if there's going to be any change to the level of increase that the Conservatives can raise, that might need to be done through a statutory instrument, but we would also want to make sure then that the impact on our level of council tax increases is taken out of the calculation. So that was certainly what we would be looked to be asking for. Whether that can all be wrapped up in that way, I'll pass back to Louise. Thank you.
Sorry, I threw that in as a bit of a curveball for you,
Yes,
Louise.
it's a slight hospital pass. I think as Caroline's indicated, there are two aspects to it. There's the rules governing what the Conservatives can raise themselves, and then there's the rules governing how that's treated for the purposes of our council tax. I think both will require some form of legislative change. So probably not something we could achieve very quickly between now and the 11th of March.
No, quite. It might be something that we have to raise with the members of Parliament after the 11th of March. We've got a few other things to worry about before then. But thank you very much. I don't think there are any other questions. Councillor Southgate, yes, do you want to ask a question?
It's not a question. It's because I wasn't expecting to work to a time limit. I missed the most important part of my reference, which was in fact to thank Councillor Pritchard for picking up the baton from Councillor Byers, but more particularly to thank Caroline, if I may, for attending the Commission meeting in person, which I think made a huge difference, and for asking all the members questions and demonstrating her flawless mastery of the detail of our budget. Much appreciated.
I'm hardly going to rule you out of order for offering thanks to people, so I do appreciate that, Councillor Southgate, and I know that will be passed on to not only the individuals involved, but also the people who work with them, who've been, really a key part in getting this done. I don't think there's anything else, so we'll go through the recommendations. So on item 4, the reference from the Overview and Scrutiny Commission, there's recommendation A, which I think is to note. Then on the business plan, there are recommendations 1 to 9. But I think we also probably need to just minute that we are coming up with proposals to deal with the Dean City Farm, and those will feed into the next sort of round of the budget process. And then on item 7, the financial monitoring report, the recommendations A and B. Can I just check that that's the correct way of dealing with it in terms of the business plan and the additional information on the Dean City Farm? I don't think anyone's disagreeing with that. So can we vote on all of those? Are they all agreed? It's agreed in the room. No one's disagreeing online. Thank you very much. So we'll move on to item 6 now, which is the COVID-19 Additional Relief Fund Scheme. And again, leading on that is Councillor Pritchard. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So this is to agree the COVID Additional Relief Fund policy that's going to be implemented by the Council as part of a wider national policy. Again, I'm not going to go through every detail of it. Needless to say, it's building on the multi-million pounds worth of support that we've given within sort of over the last 18 months to 2 years for local businesses. What we're looking to do is, having been allocated £4.78 million, we're putting out to receive applications from any business that has not received or eligible to receive the extended retail discount. So that covers retail, hospitality and leisure. We're putting out a window of about 3 weeks, and then we're going to calculate the total rateable value of the applicants and apportion that 4.7 million accordingly. All of this, as forever, will be, as always, will be done by David Kepler under the watchful eye of Caroline. He's a bit of a master at administering these grants, and in this case, tax relief, so different from grants, rates relief. And with that, I'll hand over to him if he's online to discuss it further. David. Over to you, David.
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, I mean, this scheme is, as Councillor Pritchard states, it's a reduction to the business rates bills. So last year, when the government introduced a lot of the grants, and in fact the year before, there were many businesses, particularly in the supply chain, that felt that they missed out on the retail relief, so the reduction in their rates bill. This scheme now will help to address that. So hopefully everybody within the borough who has been affected will get some form of reduction on their business rates bill for 21-22. So I'm happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you, David, and thank you to your team. Are there any further questions? Don't see any. We're very appreciative of your work on this and your efforts to get support to those who need them. Can we agree the recommendations? Sorry, as in the paper. Recommendation 1. Can we agree it? Thank you. That's agreed. So now we'll move on to the final item tonight, which is item 8, the Merton Climate Delivery Plan Year 2, and leading on that is Councillor Martin Melton. Over to you, Martin.
Thank you, Chair. I formally move the report and recommendations. The delivery plan provides review of progress during the first year delivery of Merton's Climate Strategy and Action Plan and sets out how Merton Council will continue to work towards a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions and adapt to the effects of climate change within the borough and within the council buildings and services. In 2022, Merton's Climate Strategy and Action Plan, adopted in November 2020, set a strategic approach and the long-term actions needed to meet the borough's net zero carbon targets and adapt to the effects of climate change. The Climate Action Delivery Plan was adopted by Cabinet in January 2021 and set out the Council's priority actions for the first year of delivery of the Climate Strategy and Action Plan. It included action to reduce the 2% of emissions that the Council is directly responsible for and enabling actions to support others to tackle climate change. Within the delivery plans, it covered major activities that the Council intends to do to support emissions reduction within the borough and within the Council's buildings and services. But it also considers the Council's progress in meeting its part of the Climate Strategy and Action Plan in relation to the pace and scale of change needed. It uses a set of indicators to track performances against a baseline, highlighting progress against priority actions identified in the Year 1 delivery plan, and sets out priorities for Year 2. Within this report, we provide an overview of projects delivered by the Council in 2021 and projects planned in 2022, which will help tackle climate change. This has included reviewing Merton's draft local plan climate change policies to align with Merton's carbon reductions target and reduce the need for further expensive retrofit. We have also seen last year measures in terms of the COVID-19 transport strategy to support active travel in the borough. We have made permanent the 4 low traffic neighbourhoods in Merton, which builds upon our existing network, which is the second highest in outer London. We also have had one of the largest school streets programmes in London, with 28 introduced, many of which are in the process of being made permanent. We have also seen the number of electric vehicles in the borough nearly double in the past year, from 531 to 967. As a result, the number of electric vehicle charging points has increased by over 60%, from 149 to 239, and I have no doubt we will see further increases over the next year. We have also planted over 260 trees on the borough's streets and green spaces. I'd also as well refer to the work of the Climate Action Group. This has been set up in the last year, and I co-chair it. In 2021, the Buildings and Energy Subgroup developed a proposal and secured funding to run energy training in 4 pilot schools in Merton to empower the younger generation with the knowledge to drive behaviour change around energy use. This group is working with partners to deliver this project in 2022. The Buildings and Energy Subgroup is also looking to showcase low carbon homes and buildings in Merton to promote low carbon design and retrofit in the borough. In partnership with the council, the Transport Subgroup worked to promote and support climate action initiatives in the borough, including World Car Free Day in 2021, with a series of events in Mitcham, Morden and Wimbledon Town Centres, and 19 resident-led car free days, play streets across the borough. In partnership with Sustainable Merton, the Green Economy Subgroup is developing an exciting circular economy project that aims to bring together the many waste reduction, reuse and upcycling projects in the borough under one umbrella brand, The Wheel, to raise awareness and to change consumer behaviour. This project will build the capacity of small projects so they can grow and develop. We also seen the success of the Greening Merton subgroup, which launched the Merton Garden Streets Initiative, a volunteer-led project delivered by local residents and businesses to make our streets greener. With over 90 streets signing up to planting days over the summer, community feedback highlighted the positive impacts in terms of mental and physical well-being, developing a greater sense of community. I would also place on record my thanks to Kelly Gunnell, who helped coordinate this, but also as well the many volunteers across Merton who got involved. Turning now to next year, we see that in the draft capital programme for next year, 12 million is included for the decarbonisation of Merton's refuse collection fleet from 2025, and a further £6 million for the decarbonisation of Merton's internal fleet. To support the delivery of Merton's carbon reduction commitments, officers are looking to allocate 150,000 of funding for Merton's carbon offset funds to be used as top-up funding for the Green Homes Grant Local Authority Delivery Scheme to retrofit fuel-poor homes in Merton. These will be used as funding of last resort in instances where the cost of works exceed the maximum funding allowances available through existing national funding streams. It will also enable more of a whole house retrofit approach, which will help drive the decarbonisation of heat in Merton and minimise the need for further retrofit works in the future and any associated disruption. As a council, we have made progress over the last year, but the projections going forward are not comfortable to read. The change is in the right direction, but we now know we need to move even faster and accelerate our decarbonisation. Finally, it's clear from the report how much has gone into the work to help decarbonise Merton, both from our staff and from our tireless volunteers. I would also like to take this opportunity of thanking Dominique Hill for all her work as the Climate Change Officer for the Council, but also the co-chair of the Climate Action Group, who recently stood down, Ramya Venkataraman, for being the co-chair and leading this group. I would also as well like to thank the leads on the Climate Action Group, Diana Stark, who's led on the green economy, Luke McCartney and Mabood Nakshabandi, who's led on transport, and also Jodie Anderson and James Stessler, who've led on buildings and energy. There has been progress over the last year, but I think we're all conscious there's a lot more to do. I formally move the report, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Welton. And the lead officer on this is Chris Lee, the Director of Environment and Regeneration. Chris, did you have anything to add?
No, Chair, nothing further to add. Happy to take any questions.
Fantastic. I think I just received a point that Councillor Irons just wanted to make a point.
Just very, very briefly, Chair, I'm really obviously, given my portfolio, I'm really no pun intended, and it's just really exciting to hear that we're starting to do that, and we've got the money ready to go.
Natasha, I think you dropped out, but I understood in advance that you wanted to basically praise the teams for moving towards EV electric vehicle fleets for the council, which we're intending to do by 2025. And that point is well and truly noted, and we're all very appreciative. Councillor Welton and Councillor Irons done a great job there. Chris and Dominique, if she's there, could you also please accept our thanks. Can we agree then the recommendations for this item as well, which are recommendations A to C? Excellent, they're all agreed. Thank you very much, everyone. Very good meeting, and see you all soon.